Good evening, this is Panhandle Prepper again. I just wanted to go over with you how I make my broth, how I make chicken broth or rabbit broth. Tonight we're going to be taking a look at rabbit broth. And what I did tonight is we had corn on the cob as part of our dinner tonight. So I go ahead and I used that water to start with my broth. So anyway, if you don't have already have corn on the cob, you don't have to have corn on the cob. That's just what I did tonight. So what you do is I'll go ahead and turn this here. What you do, step one, is you want to fill this pot up, maybe up to about here, with water. And then what you're going to do is you're going to take your carcass, your rabbit carcass. Now the good parts of the rabbit you're going to freeze separately into Ziploc bags and stick it in the freezer. And what you're going to have left is you're going to have the carcass, what I call the carcass, the ribs, the backbone. Let me grab a towel. And all those pieces that are too hard to pick apart. The ribs are real sharp, you don't want to cut your fingers. So you go ahead and put that carcass into that water. Only turn that down. You put that into the water, and so what you're going to do, step one, is you're going to put water in there, and you're going to put your carcass in there. And mine was frozen. I freeze all my carcasses when I'm butchering them, and that way I can use them specifically just for my broth. So as you can see, I'll go ahead and turn this camera down a little bit. Here is a picture of that. There it is. I'll move it over so you can see it. It's probably all falling apart. There it is. There's what's left of that. It's just falling apart, falling off the bone. That's part of the rib cage and stuff, and the backbone. And so I just let it sit right in there. And so you stick the carcass in there. Then you stick all your vegetables in there. I've got carrots in there and leftover vegetables from dinner, onions. I've got some okra in there from the garden, some bell peppers, green peppers, red peppers from the garden, onions from the garden. You can go into my refrigerator any given time and you're going to see carrots. You're going to see carrots, cabbage, celery. I've always got that stuff in there, so you can use it for stuff like this. So you're going to go ahead and put your carcass in there, frozen or whatever, stick it in the water, and you're going to add a bunch of vegetables. You know, several good-sized handfuls of 3 or 4 different types of vegetables. Keep it simple, 3 or 4, no problem. You can put more in if you want. And then you're going to put your spices in there, a couple bay leaves, whatever spices you might like, and you go ahead and spice it up pretty good. A little bit heavy on the spice. Stir it up real good, and you'll put the lid on the pot, and you'll bring it to a boil. Once it boils in that pot, you may have to, let me back up, before you bring it to a boil, you're going to want to add a bunch of water. Mine's been boiling for a while. You can see how much it's boiled down. I'll show you with my fork. When I added water to it before the boil, it was all the way up to here when we started, so it boiled down a good 2 inches or so. So you're going to want to add water to it before you bring it to a boil, so to compensate for that boil down process. Now mine's about done here, but what you will do is you'll bring it to a boil once you add everything into the pot. And once it's boiling, you want to have it boiling for 2 to 5 hours. Minimum 2, maximum 5, or maybe just a little bit more than that. And that way, as you can see in the pot here, let's see if I can zoom in just a little bit. All the oils and everything are all broken down. I'll move it back a little bit. It's extracting all the good stuff out of the vegetables, and it's bringing out the oils and stuff. You can see the stuff floating on top of the pot. I mean, that's a delicious broth. It smells wonderful. So after it's simmering, after you bring it to a boil, then you bring the heat back down, simmer for a little while, 2 to 5 hours, and then after that simmers for 2 to 5 hours, and you smell it, and it smells good. If it smells kind of weak, add some spices to it, let it simmer another hour, and once you're satisfied with your broth, you want to go ahead and run that whole pot, pick it up with some gloves or something, and you want to run that whole pot right through that thing there, something like that. You know, whatever you have. I'll back up a little bit. There you go. I call that my noodle pot, spaghetti pot. And you're going to go ahead and you're going to show you what it looks like so you know what I'm talking about. The holes in there, pretty big holes. But pretty much what I'll do is I will take this, once it's been simmered for 2 to 5 hours, and I'll run it right through here. And I'll go ahead and drain all the broth down into the solid pot there, and then I'll lift it up, tilt it, let it sit that way for maybe 5 minutes, 5-10 minutes, let all the broth that I can get back into the pot. And then I'll go ahead and take this and I'll put it aside. If you can use it for something else, great. If not, throw it out, whatever you need to do with it. Now what I'll have left in this pot here is just my good broth. Hopefully it'll be good, nice and full, maybe up to around here or something like that, so I can have plenty to go ahead and can later on. Alright, so now that I've got my warm, hot broth, that it's already been drained, already been simmering for several hours, I'm going to take this pot the way that it is, once it's got some broth in there, and I'm going to stick it in my refrigerator overnight. And I'm going to let it cool down overnight. And once it's cooled down overnight, I'm going to go ahead and pull it back out the next morning. Oh, let me mention this. Before you stick it in your refrigerator, you're going to want to put a big towel down, a nice thick towel down on your glass shelf on the bottom of the refrigerator, and let it sit to absorb the heat. Make sure you don't crack your glass in your refrigerator. And so overnight, pull it back out the next morning, and then you're going to take a spoon and you're going to skim off the top layer of foam slash fat. You know, it's going to be either a little bit of fat if you left the skin on a chicken. Say you do this with a chicken, you're going to have more fat. Or probably tomorrow I'll probably just see a little bit of foam on top, and I'll go ahead and scoop all that foam off and throw it out, or do something else with it. If you know what to do with that, I don't know what to do with it, but you could do something with it probably. But what I do is I just throw it out, skim it, throw it out, and then what you have left is it'll kind of look like jelly a little bit. And then what you're going to do is you're going to heat, before you use it, you're going to, even if you're going to freeze it, you want to heat it back up just enough so it kind of solidifies and becomes liquid again, not boiling, just liquid again. And then with that warm liquid, you can then stick it, once it cools back down, it's not like jelly anymore, you can stick it in the Ziploc bags or freezer containers and freeze it. Or you can pressure can it. And that'll be a whole nother topic of how to pressure can it, but you're going to bring it to a boil, and then you're going to let it simmer, and then you're going to ladle it into hot jars and go through the process of pressure canning it, which I have done. I'll show you some of my cans here that I've done. Alright, now you've got something like this. You can buy your store-bought broth, $3 to $5, or you can can your own, which I like to do. There's some chicken that I did. Alright, some spices on the bottom of that thing, and it's got a good seal in there, nice and snug, and it's been sitting on my shelf now for several months, and it'll sit there maybe a year or even more. I'll let it sit there several years if I don't use it. If I've got a big enough stockpile where I don't need it. So there's your chicken broth, and you can do the whole process. You can do it with anything really, I guess. I mean, you can certainly do it with, I do it with my chickens. Let me throw this back on here so it can get simmering again. Got about 1 more hour left, and then I'll continue on that process. But let's say that you've got this here, and this is one of my chickens from the other videos I showed you, one of the white ones, and I did this one a while ago. Look at the size of that bird. That's a Cornish rock hen. That thing is huge, delicious. We've eaten them before. They're wonderful. And after you're done cooking it in your stove, obviously, with your family, and you're all chowing down and you're eating it and everything, what you're going to do is you're going to go ahead and do the same process with your leftover carcass. You could pick it a little bit, pick it clean a little if you want, or whatever, save the good meat to eat on a sandwich, whatever you're going to do. But take that big old carcass that's already cooked and dump it in the pot, fill the pot up with water a good bit, and then repeat the same process I already talked about. And you add your water to the carcass, add your vegetable, your spices, your bay leaf, all that stuff. Bring it to a boil, simmer for 2 to 5 hours. Once it's simmered and you're satisfied with the smell and the flavor, you can add more spices. If it's kind of weak, you can add more spices, and you can let it simmer again for another hour to build the potency up. Oh, let me mention this. The longer you let it boil, the more concentrated it becomes. So if you let it boil a full 5 hours, or even maybe a little bit more, it's going to be nice and concentrated. So when you're making your stews or making your crock pot meals with the broth later on, you don't have to use as much, and you can add water to it, and it'll still be delicious. So, but back to our process here. What you're going to do is, after you stick your, you say you're going to do your chicken, you stick your chicken back in the pot after you're done eating it with your family, and you add your vegetables, your spices, your bay leaf, bring it to a boil, turn the heat down, let it simmer 2 to 5 hours, and you go through the whole process again. Right? You drain it through your thing here. I'm just recapping it. The second time I'm talking about the whole process again. So you drain it, strain it, through your strainer. Let the strainer sit on top of the pot 5 minutes, 10 minutes. It's got to cool anyway, so just let it sit up there. Okay, let it sit up there. Let it drain really well. Okay, take that off of there. Discard that. Now what you've got left in your pot is nice, clean, hot broth. So you take that broth, that hot broth, put it in the refrigerator on the bottom shelf, and you stick a towel underneath of the pot. Make sure it's nice and cool so it doesn't crack your refrigerator if you have a glass shelf or something. Let it sit overnight, and then you're going to bring it out the next morning. On the top layer, you're going to see a layer of fat or foam, and you're going to skim that layer off, throw it out, and then you're going to see it's going to look like a little bit like jelly. So what you're going to do is you're going to heat it back up a little bit, and heat it back up just enough, not boil it. If you're going to freeze it, bring it to a really light simmer, just so it's not so liquidy, solid. And then you can go ahead and let it cool down a little bit, put it in Ziploc bags or whatever, freeze it. Or if you're going to can it, then you go ahead and can it. Of course, if you're going to can it, you got to bring it to a boil and go through your canning process. So, I'll probably do a video later on that. But for now, that's about it. And that's how I do my chicken broth. And so that's it on that. Two more things I want to mention on this video. Excuse me. One of them is some things with rabbits. Is what you can do is you can save your little toilet paper or paper towel holders. You know, the rolls come on these things here, just your little cardboards that you normally would probably throw out. You can save these, and you can let your rabbits chew on them. The glue doesn't hurt them. They'll chew right through these things. They'll eat the whole thing up, or just spit it out, whatever they do with it. And multiple rabbits will tear this thing up. And I've never had a problem with them. I don't do it all the time. Every once in a while, I'll do it. And also, I use this to stick through my cages on an ornery rooster, and I'll pour my feed down the hole through the cage into a bowl or something that's already there, maybe attached to the side of the cage. And that way, I'm not sticking my hands in there all the time. So you can use it for that kind of stuff. Yeah, also fire starters and things like that. But anyway, and the other thing I wanted to mention is that on my earlier video, I mentioned that the rabbit sheds before it has its young. And that's not actually true. What the rabbit does, it pulls its own fur out, probably with its teeth, either on the belly or on the feet, the paws, and they use that fur to help make a nesting box. So, I said shed, I meant they pull it out. So, alright, well that's about it. I hope you got something out of this video. If you've never done chicken broth before, don't be afraid. Once you get going on and doing it, it's really simple, really easy. And then you can go ahead and do lots of broth and save lots of money. Can it, freeze it. You'll have tons of chicken broth you can use to cook with. And it's real easy to whip it up. I've even dumped it once it was cool, and I've already strained it and skimmed it and everything and warmed it back up. I've put in ice cube trays and a bunch of ice cube trays before, and I froze them. And then whenever I was making a small little pot of stew or something, I just throw some of those ice cubes in there, kind of like, what do you call those things? Bouillon cubes or whatever they are. It's like a flavor burst. It'll give you some flavor and some stew. And it's a good idea to do that. It's real simple, real easy, real cheap, and doesn't take much attention or time. You just stir it once in a while and go through the process, and there you have it. Alright, well thanks for watching, and good night.